Hello, everyone, and welcome to TFM, the Father-Daughter podcast where we chat about faith, family, and everything in between. I'm your host, Shauna, and sitting across from me is my dad and co-host, Emmy.
Hey there, folks. I'm excited for today's topic because it really hits home for me. Thanks for having me along for the ride, Shauna.
Of course, Dad. Today, we're digging into Nourished by God's Purpose. We'll explore how understanding and embracing God's plan can fill us up, mind, body, and soul.
You know, it's easy to go through life feeling a bit empty or directionless. But when we realize God has a unique purpose for each one of us, it gives our lives new depth and meaning.
Absolutely. So grab your favorite cup of tea, settle in, and join us as we talk about what it means to be truly nourished by God's calling and how that can transform our everyday lives. Welcome to TFM.
Living with purpose. It's a phrase we hear often, but what if I told you it's not just about self-fulfillment, but actually about tapping into a divine energy source? Today, we're diving deep into the idea that aligning with God's purpose for our lives can be as nourishing as food itself.
Wow, that's a powerful concept. How did you come across this idea?
Well, it all stems from a fascinating passage in the Bible. Jesus is talking to his disciples and he says something really intriguing. He tells them, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." And then he explains, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." John 4 verse 31 to 34.
So, Jesus is using food as a metaphor for fulfilling God's purpose?
Exactly. It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you think about it. Just as food nourishes our bodies, living in alignment with God's will nourishes our souls.
That's fascinating. But how does this apply to our everyday lives? I mean, we're not Jesus after all.
Well, you're right about that. But here's the thing. This principle isn't just for biblical figures. The idea is that each of us has a unique purpose, crafted by God. And when we align ourselves with that purpose, we tap into a source of strength, fulfillment, and even protection that goes beyond our physical needs.
So you're saying that by living in accordance with God's will for our lives, we're not just fulfilling a spiritual obligation, but we're actually nourishing ourselves in a profound way?
Precisely. It's like, imagine you're a cell phone. You can try to function on your own, but eventually you'll run out of battery. But when you plug into your purpose, your divine charging station, if you will, you're constantly being recharged and energized.
That's an interesting analogy, but here's the thing. How do we know what God's purpose for our life is? It's not like we get a divine memo with our life's mission statement, right?
Oh man, wouldn't that make things easier? But you're right. It's not always clear-cut. Finding our purpose often involves a journey of self-discovery, prayer, and paying attention to the ways God speaks to us through our experiences, our passions, and the needs we see in the world around us.
So it's not just about waiting for a sign, but actively seeking and being open to guidance?
Exactly. It's an active process. And here's something interesting to consider. The passage we discussed earlier suggests that living in our purpose actually preserves and protects us. It's like we're under a divine umbrella of protection when we're walking in God's will for our lives.
That's an intriguing concept. But how does that work in practical terms?
Well, it doesn't mean we won't face challenges or difficulties, but it suggests that we're safeguarded in a spiritual sense. We're preserved here on earth until we've completed the work we're meant to do. It's like having a cosmic insurance policy, if you will.
That's a comforting thought, but it also sounds like a big responsibility. What happens if we ignore God's will or purpose for our lives?
That's a great point. The flip side of this idea is that when we stray from our purpose or ignore God's will, we can find ourselves feeling vulnerable, weak, or unfulfilled. It's like trying to run a marathon without proper nutrition. Eventually, you're going to run out of steam.
I can definitely relate to that feeling. I think we've all had times in our lives where we felt like we were just going through the motions without any real sense of purpose or direction.
Absolutely. Those times can be really challenging. But the good news is, it's never too late to realign ourselves with God's purpose. It's a journey, not a destination.
That's encouraging to hear. So how do we start? How can we begin living more purposefully?
Well, I think the first step is to really seek God's will for our lives. That might involve prayer, meditation, studying scripture, or seeking guidance from spiritual mentors. It's about opening ourselves up to divine guidance. But it also involves some serious self-reflection.
You mean like looking at our own gifts, passions, and the needs we see in the world around us?
Exactly. God often speaks to us through those very things. Our talents, our interests, the burdens we feel for certain causes or issues. It's about paying attention to those nudges and inspirations. And here's something else to consider. When we're living in our purpose, everything else tends to fall into place.
What do you mean by that? Are you saying that all our problems will magically disappear if we're living purposefully?
Oh no, not at all. It's more nuanced than that. The passage we discussed earlier suggests that our needs, whether it's for health, provision, or protection, are met when we're aligned with God's will. It's not that we completely ignore those practical aspects of life, but rather that we trust that as we fulfill our purpose, God will provide what we need.
So it's a shift in focus from constantly worrying about our needs to trusting in God's provision as we do His work.
Precisely. It's a shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. When we're focused on our purpose, we're often less consumed by our own needs and more open to the ways God is working in our lives.
That sounds liberating, but also challenging. It requires a lot of trust, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a journey of faith, really. But many people who have embraced this way of living report feeling a deep sense of peace and fulfillment, even in the face of challenges. It's like they've tapped into a wellspring of contentment that isn't dependent on external circumstances.
Wow, that's powerful. It really brings home the idea that our purpose is our true nourishment.
Exactly. And I think it's important to note that this doesn't mean life becomes perfect or easy. I still face challenges and difficulties, but there's an underlying sense of peace and fulfillment that carries me through those tough times.
That's so encouraging. Do you have any practical tips for our listeners who want to start living more purposefully?
Absolutely. I'd suggest starting with some quiet reflection time each day. Ask yourself what brings you joy, what burdens your heart, what gifts you have to offer the world. Pay attention to the moments when you feel most alive and engaged. These can all be clues to your purpose.
Those are great suggestions. Any other advice?
Yes, I'd also recommend serving others. Often, our purpose is revealed in the process of helping those around us. And don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Sometimes God's calling leads us to unexpected places.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today.
It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, remember, you are preserved by His purpose, and in Him you live, move, and have your being. Live intentionally, walk in purpose, and fulfill your calling. Who knows? Your purpose might just change the world.
And that's all for this episode of TFM. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep living with purpose.